Ah! This is Laborc, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Did you guys notice the mustache? Yeah, I'm growing it a bit. It's gonna look so nice. First, I painted the Mini with squig orange. Only paint the head with this color because I realized I don't need it on the wings. First of all, I just wanted to try out this new airbrush and see how it feels. This squig orange will be a good tone for our shadows on the head. For the rest of the Mini, not so much, so only use it on the head. I mixed some elven flesh to the squig orange and started to create some texture on the head. Until this day, I cannot tell if Irk's head is glowing or it's like a flower. You know, the center part of the flower where you can find the seeds. So I created spots on the head to make it a bit more interesting. I use a thin layer of paint, and you can be a bit more brave with these spots than I was, because we only need a little bit of squig orange to show through. Then I glazed over it with a bit more diluted consistency. As you see, guys, I use this new format to show you the consistency that I'm working with for the glazes. Try to aim for that consistency that you see on the video. Then you learn how to glaze much better rather just following strict ratios of paint and water. After that, let's paint the eyes. It's easier to do it now because we won't screw up the face when we have some nice highlights. I used black for the whole thing because this little shaman is pretty much something bug-like, and bugs usually have these glossy black eyes. Add a white dot to the left side of the eyeball, so it will look shiny and nice. If you are not able to do that for the first time, do not worry. Take your time with it. The eyes are crucial when painting a Mini. Don't paint it googly because it will look weird, and be honest with yourself. If you think it looks bad a little bit, it's probably bad. So take your time or I will slap on your tiny hand. Now as we start placing the highlights with elven flesh, let me emphasize on the previous thought process. The only way to improve your painting skill is to make mistakes and fix them. Do not get frustrated and leave yourself time to fail. This is very important. Everyone makes mistakes, even the greatest painters. Don't worry if you spend like 1 hour making the eyes, or even 2 hours. Only the end result matters. Because if that's nice, then Papa Laborcs don't have to slap on your tiny hand. So back to painting. Thin layers again, and continue the same stippling process we did before on the head, and cover all the wings with this color. You can let the paint flow into the crevices this time. We don't need dark recesses on the wings. Now glaze over the head with elven flesh. If this is your first time watching Papa Laborcs, then basically you dilute your paint and move the paint from the shadowy parts to the light parts. The important thing is that you should use the same motion for your brush strokes and pull the paint to the same place every time, so it will be super smooth and nice, like Granny's butt cheek. Papa Laborcs should slap on his tiny hand because he forgot to record the ice yellow highlights. It's basically the same process like we did with the elven flesh, just gradually decrease the highlight areas and then glaze over them. You can see I put some emphasis on the forehead, nose and the cheeks, and there is a little gap between the highlights next to the nose on the right. So this way the face got a little more definition, because the shape of the head is not very characteristic. It's more like an alien than a human. Okay, apply ice yellow over the wings. This is a highlight, but this will be our mid-tone as well. So you can be generous with the highlight placement of this color. As you can see, I applied it more towards the end of the wings on the back, and on the leg wings you can add more next to the torso. Later I went back to the head to glaze some more ice yellow over all the surface to create a filter. For the last highlight, I used ivory around the eyebrows, or where the eyebrows should be, and the cheeks, but you should put a little on the nose too. This is a thin layer consistency, so dilute it a bit. Then go to the wings and follow the same highlight placement we did with the ice yellow in the previous step. This time try not to get paint in the recesses of the wing, because I will slap on your tiny hand. Now for the Chitin part. Cover all the chitin with nocturne green. This is almost black and we use that layer so we don't have to blackline anything later. It covers really well if you use it in base layer consistency, so you can do it in one coat. Watch out for the wings because you can stain them pretty bad and then you need to fix them with your aching hand. Why is your tiny hand hurt, you may ask? Because I slapped on it. Use WA flash for the 99% of the chitin surface and leave the parts that you would blackline with nocturne green. Like towards that binding that goes over her armor panels. Irk is a girl, right? I mean, I wasn't sure about Gita, but I think Irk is a girl because she has some bug boobs or something. With a thin layer of WA flash and Elysian green, sketch out some highlights. Use several layers to increase the opacity. This chitin armor is still very dark, so you can just put the mini under the lamp to see where the highlights would go. Then with pure Elysian green, paint some stripes on the big chitin surfaces. You can be creative and do more than Papa Laborc did, or you can create some spots or even a Batman sign. Your lines doesn't have to be perfect, just try to follow the shape of the armor panels. Use thin coats for that. Continue to highlight the rest of the mini with this color. Put some highlights on the shoulder and arms and on those giant beetle-like horns. By the way guys, I'm really happy that more and more of you send me the results through Instagram. Like, look at this gentleman. What really makes me proud that your paint jobs improve every time I see a new picture. I know there are more people following these guides but not sharing the results, and that is fine, but it is a great way to track your improvement. Taking photos of your minis is very important, because if you take a picture, you can tell almost immediately where to put some more work, or if something needs some fixing. So even if you don't post these pictures anywhere, just take some photos of your work. It will improve your painting skill tremendously. Alrighty, glaze over the Elysian green a couple of times to make it silky smooth like Granny's butt cheek. Increase the contrast of those highlights even more with green camo. Thin layers guys, almost like a heavy glaze, so it will blend in more easily. You can add some secondary highlights too, like the bottom of the forearm. If you look at photos of bugs, their chitin can be really shiny like a gloss finish. So increase the highlights as much as you want. Glaze over our green camo highlights with a couple of layers, like 2 or 3 times, and your bag will be smooth and nice. Now, did you notice we didn't do any highlights on the big armor panels with the stripes? That's about to change. This will be a glazing masterclass. Create some dots in a round shape. That will be the foundation of our glint on the chitin. You can spread the dots around the edges and make them more dense in the middle. like little freckles on Granny's butt cheek, but without the hair. Place these where it would make sense for the highlights. After you are done, then start glazing the ogre camo toward the center of those round shapes. You see, the glaze I'm using is quite light because we are making a transition from dark to light green. This will take you many layers, so if you are comfortable with an airbrush, then use that. But it's only like 10 or 15 layers, so it's no big deal. And glazing is super fun. Right, guys? Right? If you say no, I will slap on your tiny hand very hard. Not because you don't like glazing, but because you lie to yourself that you don't like glazing. And that's way worse. Okay? If your layer is smooth, then you can go on and decrease the highlight area with the ice yellow. So we will increase the light value of our glint. We increase the highlights all over the miniature with this color. Exactly the same process, but, and this is very interesting, when you get to the glazing part, you will find out we don't need as many layers of glaze like we did with the ogre camo. Why is that? If you saw some videos from Papa Laborc, I think you know why. Ice yellow and ogre camo are close to each other on the color wheel, so they will blend easily. At the previous step, the ogre camo on the WA flash blended much harder because there was a much bigger difference in the light values of the color. So, what did we learn today? We learned that Papa Laborc is super smart, and glazing is a magnificent and wonderful technique. For the final highlight, I used ivory. I use it as a thin layer. It almost blends in an instant. This is why it's highly advised to increase your highlights with small steps, so you can have a smooth and nice finish. With all these bright highlights, we lost some vibrancy of our green. So glaze some mood green next to our highlights, so it will look much more vibrant and saturated. It's a super fun process, like the mini is coming alive slowly and you can't really make a mistake here. I mean, you can, because if you glaze this over the highlights, then you will move them down and I will slap on your tiny hand. Alrighty, the sword is a super simple enamel. I painted the whole thing with dark sea blue, then sketched out the highlights with Thunderhawk blue, then glazed over it a couple of times to blend it. Then I used the Rolls Royce of the greys, Administratum grey, and decreased the highlight areas. I applied it with a bit more organic approach, using very thin layers and gradually increased the opacity, so it didn't need much glazing. Of course, I glazed it anyway to make it smoother, but you know, if you apply paint like this, it's easier to blend. Then I used ivory for the maximum highlights. Tiny dots and brush strokes to make it smooth. Lastly, I edge highlighted the sword with pure white, but only on the sides. I left that middle edge on the center of the sword without edge highlight because it was quite poorly sculpted and not a straight line. So even with freehand it was very hard to paint it, and I ended up redoing the sword 2 times. So yeah, some of the details of these minis sometimes are a bit rough. I mean, looking at the quality of the plastic, it's much better what it was like with the first zombie side. Final step, guys. We need to blend the Elven flesh part with the green where the horn starts. So you use a glaze consistency for Elven flesh and try to blend it gently. It doesn't have to be perfect. If it's not rough, then it's all good. And there you have it, guys. Irk is ready to go into battle using the elements of nature. So thank you for joining me on this little painting adventure. A huge thanks to my patrons who support these kind of videos. With a special shout out to Dominic Reitman and Trying to Paint Mayonnaise! If you want to support Papa Laborc on Patreon, the link is in the description. You can have early access to these video tutorials and you can vote on the next mini. Now, I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.